If you could make one change that impacted a child's entire life, wouldn't you want to take that opportunity? I want to show you that you have that opportunity. You have it every single day. It's just up to you whether or not you use it. The last couple of years has all been about the babies and parents, hasn't it? The new funding's brought about more fuller waiting lists, more babies that aren't even born yet on our waiting lists, and the challenge of settling more babies into our baby rooms. Babies who have often co-slept, been worn for a long time by their parents, and also with parents who are juggling so much. They're leaving their babies earlier for the first time, and of course they're returning to work with all the guilt that that brings. It's a real challenge. And from January 2024 onwards, the Early Years Foundation Stage revised framework put babies and parents in the first sentence as a must-do action. It seems that this sentence may well have been missed by many, and it is this section that says that what providers must do, working in partnership with parents and carers, is to promote learning and development of all children in their care to ensure the entire early years experience contributes positively to brain development and readiness for Key Stage 1 so that ultimately they can benefit fully from future learning opportunities. And it seems that everybody's talking about babies. Perhaps the new influx of the babies is a unique opportunity for us to help all our children thrive. What if we could gain an extra 18 months of development time for our babies before they even arrive in our setting at 9 months old? And what if we could do that with the support and engagement of parents? Wouldn't that be amazing? And Ofsted has really helped us with this, with their research, getting it right from the start, because what they show us is what we're doing right and also where the challenges are. What we're finding is that more needs to be done to help our educators, ourselves, and the people in our team to understand our role and in babies and toddlers' physical development, but also how if we have more understanding, more learning and research and understanding ourselves, we're greater educators as a result, and that there's often many misconceptions about learning and development and high quality practice, which is getting in the way of helping our babies thrive. And today I want to talk to you all about the first 1,000 days and the science of this period of time. So, what is the first 1,000 days? It's the time from conception to two. It's the time when the brain is literally building itself and it's growing faster than any other time in life. And these first 1,000 days are the most important potentially for our baby's development and the foundations of everything that's coming. We're continually learning more about the science of this period of time, but we know that what happens during this time impacts a child's life going forward, from the job they will do, from their resilience, their creativity, their problem solving, their ability to inquire and investigate, their ability to focus, their academic outcomes. It even impacts their biological outcomes and their health, but also it impacts how much money they will go on to earn and the relationships that they go on to have. Honestly, this first 1,000 days is an incredibly critical period of time. And it all starts incredibly early. By week 8 after conception, the brain is forming around 250,000 neurons a minute. And at 24 weeks gestation, that's after conception, the baby can hear muffled sounds in the womb and they begin to form bonds with their parents. Isn't that amazing? And during that first year, at times, more than 1 million synaptic connections are being created every second during the peak of brain growth. And by the age of 3, a child's brain is 90% developed. And it's developed through experiences, and each experience, each interaction that happens during this time is literally shaping and developing their unique brain. Harvard's Centre on the Developing Child, the people that did the research, the original research on the first 1,000 days of life, describe this period of time like building the foundations of a house. If you have strong foundations, it enables you to put on fantastic straight walls, put the windows in the right place, put the roof on, and it to be go on easily, and the wiring to go in all the right places so that when you switch the light on downstairs, the right light goes on upstairs. That's the foundations that we are creating in the first 1,000 days. But at the same time, we're also building the foundations of learning. And I like to think of learning like building a pyramid. You see, if you think about a pyramid, it has a really wide base. And each brick is roughly the same size, and each brick forms the foundation of the next layer in the pyramid. And the pyramid is being built in order to hold the finished product, the final brick. What we're going to call the finished child, but I don't know what a finished child looks like. If you ever come across one, let me know. But so we're building the foundations brick by brick, tiny moment by tiny moment, skill on skill. They're building the foundations of the next that the child will need in order to form the next layer, the foundations for the next layer of learning, all the way up until they reach the finished brick, the finished them. And so, if you think about it, a child who's goes on to do a degree in physics or natural sciences or something like that, the foundations on which they build their PhD or whatever it is they go on to do, laid down in these first 1,000 days. And so, what we're looking for, these foundations are built through experiences, really rich experiences that happen early on. And each experience is one tiny increment of development. Each tiny increment is another brick, and those bricks build layer on layer to support the finished child. And all this matters because of this one tiny fact. By the time the babies leave your baby and toddler room, they are already on a trajectory of development. A child's development at 22 months old has been shown to be an excellent predictor of academic outcomes at 26 years. And this matters because we also know that a child who arrives in reception 4.3 months behind their peers at 5 and is on persistent free school meals, by the time they're 16, the implications for the qualifications for their life are absolutely huge. So by the time they arrive in secondary school, they're already 24.3 months behind their peers. Now imagine what happens when they come to take their GCSEs, almost 2 years behind where everybody else is. Inevitably, that it's harder for them to reach their full potential and succeed in those exams that ultimately set us on the path of where we're going. So what happens in those early days really, really matters. And yet, many of us are only getting our babies into our settings in the term in which they turn 9 months old. Now, if that happens, a baby has already had 18 months of the 33 months of the first 1,000 days. That's 57% of the first 1,000 days. That's a whole lot of brain developing time that's passed with their parents who know little or nothing about baby development and play for development. And that's happened before they've even arrived with you. So the question is, what do you actually do with your parents before their baby walks through the door? Do you have a program for them while they're on the waiting list? During that time, babies have been with their parents who quite often have never had anything to do with babies before, other than having been one themselves. And probably they can't remember much about that. And they know nothing about child development themselves, which means we need to use the time, if we possibly can, that's available to us to the full. Now, all babies come with parents and carers. And our parents today are probably the best informed parents but also the least supported parents that we've ever had. There's no consistency of care through pregnancy, there's limited health visitor experiences, and families are spread out across the world. And they've, of course, got Dr. Google on hand to answer any question at any time. And they've got the wonderful Pinterest and Instagram to show us exactly how perfect our lives should be. But this isn't resulting in more confident, competent parents. Actually, it's resulting in quite the opposite, which I'm sure you're seeing also in your settings. And year on year, Kindred Squared are finding the same thing in the annual school readiness survey. 43% of parents haven't heard of school readiness before their child turns 4. 22% had never had a health visitor visit. And around half of parents think that more access to high quality childcare, in other words, more access to you, would result in their child being more prepared and ready for school and improve school readiness. And it really, really matters, because what we're seeing is that, yes, year on year, children are arriving not ready for school. And when that happens, that children who struggle with language, for example, in the early years, are 6 times more likely to fail their English tests when they're 11, and 11 times less likely to pass their maths tests. And they're 2 times more likely to have mental health problems and 2 times more likely to be unemployed as an adult. The implications of our children arriving not ready for school and behind is absolutely massive. So what can we actually do about this? What can we do about the first 1,000 days, and how do we make the most of this magical time that we have when the brain is building itself literally in front of our eyes, second by second, day by day, for 1,000 days? Well, the first time I realised the enormity of the brain development that was happening in front of me was in an incredibly normal moment. It probably was about 10:46 on an October morning. Maybe it was a Tuesday in 2002. Who knows what day it was? But I was sitting on the floor on the carpet with my then 2-month-old daughter, and I was doing the dutiful thing, and I was shaking a rattle. And she watched, and naturally, just without thinking about it, I handed the rattle to her. And she held it, and she moved it around, seemingly incredibly randomly. It was an incredibly, totally normal moment, so ordinary. But I then realised in that moment, she was holding the rattle, and that was helping her build the strength for her pencil grip that she would later need when she was at school. But not only that, she was developing her hand strength, her core strength, her balance as she sat there, her hand-eye coordination, as she put it in her mouth, her in-mouth sensory receptors, even her eye tracking was being developed. And so was her hearing in what looked like an incredibly tiny moment. And it blew my mind with the amount of learning and development that was actually contained in that nanosecond of a moment. Really, it was in the tiniest of moments, so much learning happening. And as I understood more, I started to see more. And the more I saw, the more I realised there were tiny steps in between the milestones that we had been trained to look for. Those tiny moments that needed to be experienced and tried and tested and honed by the baby. And that babies actually know what they need to do in order to support their development. Our job is simply to provide the experiences and the opportunities and the relationships to help make that happen. And when we understand this and we understand those steps in development, the tiny ones, and we play with babies in a way that is meaningful Play that with babies that can feel boring suddenly becomes amazing and scientific and utterly, utterly fascinating. Babies are born what's called experience expectant and experience dependent. Basically, what that means is they need experiences and they expect them in order to be able to develop. And they learn from everything that happens to and around them, the good and the bad. But the wonderful thing is, we really don't need a PhD or rocket science to be able to support our baby's developmental success. Simple, everyday interactions and games and play and relationships have a profound effect on our baby's development. The key is that every partner in the journey, our parents, our educators, our managers, our owners, our leaders, all need to understand why they are doing what they're doing and how that impacts later life learning for the baby from as early as possible in the first 1,000 days of life. And luckily for us, nature gives us 9 months as parents to prepare for becoming a parent. And waiting lists in our nurseries have given us access to these parents during this time. If we use this time in a planned and curated way, we can literally transform the outcomes for everyone. So, what are the implications for us then about this? Well, change comes from the top. Simple, tiny steps make big impacts on babies over time and families over time. And we need to realize how important our settings are in shaping the lives and the life outcomes of the babies and the families we interact with. We need to understand that we shape what happens in our settings, the way that we behave, the way that we show up. We create how things turn out in our settings. Consequently, if your parents aren't engaged in helping their babies to develop in your nursery, the question I would ask you is, what are you doing to change that? One thing you could try is you could borrow a phrase that I teach in Oliiki nurseries, in the Oliiki nurseries program, and that is that in our nursery, we. What that does is it means you can use it across all sorts of things and you can set the expectations and the tone you want. You can literally use it to define the things that you want to have happen in your setting, particularly with your new parents. Most often, it's not the parents aren't interested and don't want to know. I promise you they do. I have over 20,000 followers, parent followers on TikTok. That's more than the O2. And every one of them is there because they want to know about baby development, because that's all I talk about. And they interact and they engage, they ask questions and they comment. It's not that they don't want to know. Parents do want to know, but they don't want to feel judged. They don't want to feel like they've got it wrong. And they need you to lead them through the journey that they're on. You have amazing power in the role that you're in, with our new parents particularly. And when we enhance our educators' understanding of play for development and our babies' development needs, and they engage more effectively, they'll engage with the babies, they then can engage more confidently with our parents, helping them to feel included and involved and really part of the solution for their baby's development success. And when we start including parents as real partners, before they even begin in our setting. For example, at the first look around, which is what happens when you become an Oliiki nursery, you start engaging parents at that time. What happens is, while they're on the waiting list, they become part of your community. They feel more involved and they understand more about their role and they understand more about what you're trying to do. And because they understand more, they're more fully engaged in and they're using all of the first 1,000 days right from the beginning to the full. And we know how important this is for our children's life outcomes, but also for our ability to build on those skills that the child brings to the setting when they do arrive. And when we start engaging with our parents early on, and we start giving them the tools to be able to engage with their babies confidently, which with the Oliiki Nurseries is the Oliiki app, which comes as part of the Oliiki Nursery program, the Building Babies' Brains program. What happens is those babies who are creating a million synapse connections a second have a greater opportunity to learn, which ultimately means there's less catch up, there's less troubleshooting later on, there's less managing the parents later on, and there's absolutely less filling of gaps. There's more development opportunities, more fun for our babies, more professional pride for our staff when they start understanding this stuff as well, and more engagement for our parents, and way more satisfaction for ourselves. And your parent partnership just happens without needing more time or without you having to do more. And if you're using the Oliiki Building Babies' Brains program, all of this happens without taking anybody, all that development happens without taking anybody out of the baby room. It happens in the moment, in the everyday of the baby room. You see, when you really start thinking about it, you're not just caring for babies. You are literally partnering with families to lay the foundation for their child's future. Because every interaction, every shared observation literally builds brains. Every moment that you help a parent see what their baby is working on, you're building their brains. And when you and your team understand the why behind what you're doing and how that helps the child's development, which is what you get when you're in the Oliiki's Building Babies' Brains program, literally, you build brains and you know you're doing it. Which is fundamentally important because we know that the first 1,000 days literally lasts a lifetime.